The word that undermines marriage. We Americans should be good at imaging because we are an optimistic people. We think mistakes can be corrected. We believe obstacles can be overcome. We like to dream big. And what is dreaming when it is focused intensely, but a powerful form of imaging? It has always been this way in this country. The great 19th century explorer, John C. Fremont, wrote of nights spent beside a flickering campfire on the Great Plains, listening to the coyotes howl and dreaming of mighty cities that someday would stand in the vast emptiness around him. Fremont's dreams must have seemed like the wildest fantasies at the time. But today, there the cities stand. One of our most beloved patriotic songs, America the Beautiful, reflects this soaring optimism, "O beautiful for patriot dream, that sees, beyond the years, thine alabaster cities gleam, undimmed by human tears." Hardly a reality, you may say. Ah, but what a vision! Alabaster cities gleaming somewhere down the shining road of the future. Poverty and disease conquered. War abolished. People living joyous lives of work and play and service, no tears. If Fremont could dream his impossible dreams and have them realized 150 years later, who knows what may happen to our own dreams and images in another century or two? But there are some pressing problems that we have to solve first. And one of these concerns the ancient and honorable estate known as matrimony. Let us devote this chapter to a discussion of marriage and where it stands today. Everyone knows that the divorce rate in this country has risen to the point where, in some states at least, 1 out of every 2 marriages winds up as a failure. This is a deeply disturbing state of affairs, because marriage is the glue that holds the family together. And the family is the basic unit of society, indeed of civilization itself. Cicero said, "The empire is at the fireside." What is the matter with modern marriage, anyway? I think the answer is that there is nothing wrong with marriage. What is wrong is the concept. That is to say, the image of marriage that has prevailed in the last 2 or 3 decades, especially among our young people. The other day, on a shuttle plane between Boston and New York, I found myself sitting beside an affable stranger. When I casually asked him what took him to New York, he said that he was going down to attend his daughter's wedding that afternoon. "Well, congratulations," I said. "That's wonderful." He gave a wry little laugh. "Yes, a bit monotonous, though. This is her 3rd. "Oh," I said, not knowing what else to say. "She's a bright girl," he told me. "She has a very good job. But here she is, at the age of 24, trying matrimony for the 3rd time. 2 down, 1 to go. I hope this time it works." "I hope so, too," I said. "But you know," he went on a bit grimly, "I don't know why it should. This fellow she is marrying seems nice enough. But so did the other 2 young fellows whom she divorced. This one's been divorced himself, and he's only 25. I don't know what is happening to the institution of marriage, really. Young people nowadays seem to regard it as a kind of game of musical chairs." He stared out the window at the carpet of clouds below us and shook his head slowly. "It is a funny feeling to be going to your daughter's 3rd wedding. And saying to yourself, maybe it'll work and maybe it won't." "Maybe," I said dryly, "that is where the trouble lies. In that word maybe. And it does, you know. Let me explain. Having been completely and happily married for a lot of years, I know I tend to look at marriage from a point of view that must seem pretty old-fashioned to some members of the younger generation. I believe in monogamy, fidelity, total commitment to a married partner. I believe in these things because the Word of God Himself tells us that that is the way human beings are supposed to live. And He certainly knows the score. Ruth and I know from first-hand experience that the rewards of living that way are so great that any deviation seems just plain senseless. To us, marriage is a compact sealed with love that cannot be broken. To us, marriage is a compact sealed with love that cannot be broken. It is a promise between two consenting adults to join their lives and stick together through thick and thin, good times and bad, until life comes to an end. No maybe about it for us. None whatsoever. But in the last 2 or 3 decades, that word has crept into the American concept of marriage until it is the word most often used. The fatal maybe attitude. I'm getting married, and I hope it works, but maybe it won't. And if it doesn't, maybe I can just cancel out and look for another partner. Why not? That is what everybody's doing. I am married, but maybe I've made a mistake. Maybe I've married a bit beneath me. Maybe I'm still growing and my partner has stopped growing. Maybe our sex life isn't what it ought to be. Maybe I'd be happier married to someone else. Maybe I'd be happier not married to anyone. Maybe. 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 Every single one of those maybes is a form of negative imaging. They represent images of marital failure. They leave an escape hatch always open. And the more they are thought about, or toyed with, or dwelled upon, the stronger is the possibility that the escape hatch will be used. 2 or 3 years ago, a young woman came to me saying that her husband was neglecting her. He was a brilliant young medical student, but she complained that he studied day and night. He never took her out to a play or a movie. He never took her dancing. They seldom went to a restaurant. They barely had enough money for necessities, and none for luxuries. He had his nose in a book all the time. She went on whining like this for several minutes. Finally she said, "I don't know why I married Tom. There was another boy named Gerald who wanted to marry me, too. I turned him down for Tom, but maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I should have married Gerald." "Stop," I said to her. "Stop right there. Your husband isn't neglecting you, young lady, you're neglecting him. He is working his heart out trying to prepare for a life of helping people. He needs all the support he can get from a loyal, loving wife, not sulks and tantrums from a spoiled little fluffy kitten. So my advice to you is this: go back to your husband. Thank God every day of your life that you are fortunate enough to be married to a man like that. Put all these ridiculous maybes out of your mind. The one maybe you can use would be to say to yourself, maybe I can think of a new way to be loving and supportive of Tom today." Harsh words? Perhaps. But she needed to hear them. She went away looking very pensive, and evidently some of the words got through to her, because she is still married to Tom, not to Gerald or anyone else, and Tom is about ready to start a successful medical career. Parenthetically, I suggested to Tom that he knock off once in a while and at least go to McDonald's for a Big Mac. He did, and they both had fun. Young people are not the only ones who have a flawed concept of marriage these days. Ruth and I receive a great deal of mail from older people struggling with marital difficulties, and a remarkably high percentage deals with a phenomenon that we sometimes refer to as the walkaway husband problem. In letter after letter, bewildered, unhappy, heartbroken women report that after 15, 20, even 30 years of marriage their life partner has suddenly walked out on them. Sometimes another woman is involved, sometimes not. Sometimes the husbands give an explanation, sometimes they don't. The net result is the same: the husband, often the chief breadwinner, is suddenly no longer there, leaving a wife and often children to struggle as best they can to rebuild their lives, or even to survive. Again, it seems plain to me that behind this grim and increasingly frequent state of affairs lies a faulty image of marriage. To the walkaway husband, marriage has become the symbol of a relationship full of drudgery, monotony, and unrequited sacrifice. He sees himself as the plodding, patient, long-suffering bearer of endless financial burdens. All these years, he tells himself, I've been pulling this load. 95% of my earnings have gone to support this wife and these children. But what about me? What does he have to show for all this effort? A wife who's overweight physically and underweight mentally. Children who are leaving the nest, who have their own lives to lead. As time goes by, he and his wife have less and less in common, less and less to talk about. Here he is, at age 50 or 55. He probably has a couple of pretty good decades left. He thinks, why don't I get out from under these burdens and live a little? Maybe I'll meet some woman who is physically more attractive and mentally more stimulating. Who knows, instead of being totally dependent on him, she might be a strong person who could help him to cope with problems. A partner instead of a drag. Anyway, he says, I've had it. I've done my duty. I've served my time. I'm getting out. And to the consternation of everyone. Wife, children, friends, neighbors. Out he goes. The sad thing about these cases is that I'm sure they never happen overnight. Almost always the discontent of the husband, or of the wife if the situation is reversed, has been growing over a long period of time, and the discontented partner has been giving warning signals of all kinds. For heaven's sake, Agnes, stop nagging me about going to church. Harold, why don't you talk to me anymore? All you do is come home and drink beer and stare at the television. The signals are clear enough. But they are ignored. Communication fades away. Neither partner is willing or able to look realistically at his or her own performance, or share the blame for the slow deterioration that is taking place. And so they pass the point of no return and slide faster and faster down the slope that ends in desertion or divorce. Now, what is the remedy for all this? What can be done to prevent such dismal endings to once bright hopes and dreams? What can people whose marriage is in trouble do about it? I think the main thing they can do is try to revive and recapture the image of marriage as a triumphant, rewarding, lifelong partnership where the pluses outweigh the minuses by an overwhelming margin. I think they have to stop focusing on the worst aspects of their lives together and reach out for the best. Expect it and hope for it and pray for it and work for it and image it until it once more becomes a reality. I sometimes think it would help if ministers who marry starry-eyed young couples would urge them to project themselves into the future, see themselves raising a happy houseful of kids, visualize themselves working out problems together as a team in human service. Supporting each other, loving each other, being faithful to each other. They should be encouraged to visualize their later years, with grandchildren coming along and a great and satisfying marriage partnership growing ever closer and more loving. They should be urged to paint this dream as vividly as possible, and they should be assured that the reality would follow the dream if they imaged it and worked for it and prayed for it hard enough. Imaging? Of course. But it really does create a climate in which an ever-deepening relationship can grow and flourish. Experiment saved a marriage. Imaging can also be a healing influence in marriages where cracks have appeared. Some years ago, a couple I had married wrote to me saying that things were going badly and that they were on the verge of divorce. They thought that since I had married them, they should let me know. In my reply, I urged them to carry out a week-long experiment that I said might save their tottering marriage. I told them to find an alarm clock, one with a loud tick, then each morning go into a room with 2 chairs and spend 20 minutes in uninterrupted silence. In the first 10 minutes, I wanted each of them to visualize in vivid detail. It was imaging, but I didn't call it that, what their lives would be like after the divorce. The effect on the children. The loneliness. The guilt. The sense of loss and broken dreams. The financial strains and dislocations. The side-taking among former friends. The whole dreary aftermath. Then in the second 10 minutes, I urged them to recall as vividly as possible some of the happiest, most loving times they had known together. Imaging again, the memory of past happiness can point the compass of the unconscious mind toward the goal of similar happiness in the future. I told them, finally, that if they would listen carefully to the loud, rhythmic tick of the clock, they would find it repeating the word that was at the bottom of all their troubles: self, 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 self. I urged them both to ask the Lord to come into their hearts and remove that most universal of all sins, selfishness. If they would do that, I told them, they would be praying together. And I added that never in all my experience had I known any couple to get a divorce who had prayed together. Well, you know, it worked. And imaging had a lot to do with it. I remember other cases, too, where imaging saved a shaky marriage. In World War II, many marriages underwent severe strains when there were long separations, wives alone at home, soldier husbands far away overseas. In one fairly typical case, a young husband stationed in England fell in love with an American Red Cross girl who was also stationed there. When the war ended, the soldier came back to his wife and told her that he was sorry, but he had met another girl, they had fallen in love, they were sure they were made for each other. He said he felt very badly about the way things had worked out, especially since he and his wife had 2 small children born before the war, but he wanted his wife to give him a divorce. He was sure that, under the circumstances, she would. But the wife had had a Quaker upbringing, which meant that she had a quiet inner strength. She did not panic. She did not fly into a jealous rage. She told her husband that she knew him better than he knew himself. He was, she said, basically a good father and a good husband. That side of him would reassert itself someday. Until that day, she would simply wait. She would not give him a divorce. The husband argued, he pleaded, he told the wife that he no longer loved her, that he loved the Red Cross girl. He said that by refusing to let him go, she was making them all miserable. He added that, being young and attractive, his wife would undoubtedly marry again. She replied that she already had a marriage. It was going through a difficult period, she admitted, but sooner or later it would come out the other side, stronger than before. She could see that day clearly in her mind. She visualized the 2 of them going on with their lives, raising their children, and perhaps having more. She imaged them in love again, this whole dark interlude forgotten. She said serenely that she believed this was God's plan for them. Therefore, she could not give him a divorce. The husband departed, angry and frustrated. He went back to the Red Cross girl, who was waiting for him in her hometown. He told her that his wife would eventually stop being so stubborn. It was just a matter of time. He was in a difficult and humiliating position. All they had to do was wait. So they waited. And waited. And waited. And gradually it became apparent to the Red Cross girl that she was the one who was in the humiliating position. Finally, she told her lover that she was tired of waiting for the stubborn wife to step aside. The glamour was gone from their situation. She wanted a husband of her own, not a man anchored to another woman. She told him to get lost. By this time, the husband was beginning to have second thoughts himself. As his wife had said, there was a part of him that recognized his obligations to her and the children. And he also became increasingly conscious of deep emotional ties that he knew existed. He was impressed that his wife was really a great woman. Finally, sheepishly and contritely, he came back home. His wife welcomed him quietly. She was not surprised. It was all working out just the way she had imaged it. There were no recriminations. She took him back. And that marriage went forward successfully, saved by the emotional balance and good sense of a real woman who imaged her way through an ugly situation and came out triumphantly on the other side. I remember another case in a small town where a woman was married to a man who was a notorious philanderer. He was very attractive to women, and whenever temptation crossed his path he followed Oscar Wilde's advice to get rid of the temptation by giving in to it. Small towns being what they are, his affairs and escapades were common knowledge, and from time to time certain ladies of the community, pillars of society themselves, of course, would decide that it was their duty to tell the wife about the misdeeds of her husband. She imaged her marriage to success. But they never got much satisfaction when they did. The wife would smile and shake her head and say that she knew they meant well, but they were mistaken. She knew her husband. She trusted him. She knew he loved her. It was impossible for her to conceive of any such disloyalty on his part. Her informants were simply misinformed. The informants would go away baffled and frustrated, because they knew very well that they were right. Now, was this wife actually imaging a husband who was a model of marital fidelity? or was she just being remarkably patient and wise? Being a mere man, I can't answer that question. All I know is that gradually the amorous adventures of the husband began to be less frequent. Finally, they ceased altogether. And when a close friend asked him, in considerable amazement, what had happened, the husband said, "Well, you know, when my wife trusted me and refused to believe what people told her, even when it was true, I began to feel more and more like a low-down, no-good skunk. If she loved me that much, then the least I could do was to try to live up to her concept of me. And that's what I'm going to do from now on." In other words, the man responded to the image of himself that he saw reflected in his wife's eyes, and began behaving like a man-sized husband instead of a heel. Even when a clear, steady image of successful marriage is kept in mind, it is a relationship that must be constantly monitored, adjusted, and nourished. Here are 7 suggestions that Ruth and I recommend to marriage partners who want to keep the flame alive. 1. Try to have a mature concept of what love really is. For too many Americans, love is a breathless romantic glow in which they expect to have their own emotional needs gratified. Some people, especially young people, are really little more than receiving stations for this kind of supportive attention from a member of the opposite sex. They are addicted to it. They have to have it, and they sulk if they don't get it. But this is dependency, not love. It is shallow, not deep. It is a feeling, not a commitment, a feeling that can change as moods or circumstances change. And if the feeling vanishes, even temporarily, then it is easy to decide that love has ended. Romantic love doesn't really change anyone. Mature love has a spiritual dimension that alters a person profoundly, and changes him or her from a self-oriented person to an others-oriented person. In mature love, the beloved's welfare and happiness becomes more important than your own. As someone said, real love is the accurate estimate and supply of another's needs. Another definition, love is what comes from living through difficulties together. These concepts are a long way from the romantic, sex-saturated depiction of love that is so prevalent and so popular in our American culture. But they are far closer to the truth. Some people never learn that love is not just a pleasant feeling, it is a way of regarding another person and treating that person. A young woman sitting stony-faced in my office not long ago said to me, "I don't love my husband anymore." I said, "How do you know that?" She said, "I don't feel loving toward him, that's why. I don't feel anything." I said, "Love is more than a feeling. If for 1 month you will simply do the loving thing where your husband is concerned, do it regardless of how you feel or don't feel, perhaps the affection you once had for him will come back. Act as though you love him, whether you think you do or not. The important thing right now is how you act, not how you feel. If you will make yourself do the loving thing, if you will simply treat your husband with kindness and consideration, you may be able to salvage your marriage." To act in this way is not deception. It is the dramatization, really, of a hoped-for image of things to come. In this case, that woman is still trying, and successfully, too, for the marriage is still alive. 2. Work on communications constantly. No matter how long you have been married, you can never take your lines of communication for granted. They need to be constantly used, tested, and if necessary repaired. If a husband and wife are separated during most of the day, as many couples are, it is wise to set aside a specific time, perhaps early in the morning, perhaps before going to bed, to talk about plans and problems, grievances or misunderstandings, all or any aspect of living together. That way, difficulties can be dealt with while they are still molehills, not mountains. Once the habit of sharing things verbally is established, the marriage becomes much more resistant to the stress and strains that surround it. The truth is, marriage is a contract that needs to be renegotiated constantly, with compromises and concessions and common sense. You have to watch for areas where you are not communicating. For example, can each partner discuss in-laws frankly and openly? And try to get a dialogue going. There are many forms of communication in marriage. Sometimes sympathetic listening is the best form, sometimes just knowing when to be silent. Sometimes it is working together, sometimes it is shared play. Sometimes it is a casual, affectionate touch, sometimes just a glance. Sometimes shared laughter. Sometimes the joy of sexual reunion. Whatever form it takes, it is the heartbeat of marriage. When it ceases, the marriage dies. 3. Learn how to defer gratification. This is a combination of self-control and patience. Both marriage partners have to be willing at times to put off or forego immediate pleasures or satisfaction in order to obtain greater benefits in the future. This may sound obvious, but I have seen the failure to do this wreck many marriages. Some people cannot bring themselves to save money, or put it to work for them in long-range plans or investments. Others refuse to work overtime, even when overtime work will ultimately bring them significant rewards. They're too interested in having their pleasure or their recreation right now. Imaging helps here, too, because if you image a desired goal vividly enough, if you visualize the rewards of patience and self-discipline clearly enough, you can often supply the motivation that otherwise might be missing. I often think that if quarreling couples on the brink of divorce would just defer that gratification for a few weeks or months, they might wind up with a stronger marriage than before. They might learn that difficulties or even pain can be a trigger to growth. They might even realize, upon reflection, that escaping out the back door of marriage is not likely to change the basic problems they are facing. Those problems will probably go right along with them into the next relationship that they try to establish. 4. Take responsibility. Accept the truth that marriage is going to be what you and one other person make it, no better and no worse. Face up to the fact that in any disagreement or controversy you are not going to change your partner very much, if at all. The only person you can really change is yourself. But when you do change yourself, by accepting blame occasionally, by apologizing sometimes, by compromising now and then, the whole human equation changes and things often work out the way you want after all. A man said to me not long ago, "I prayed about my wife's drinking problem." "Has she stopped drinking?" I asked. "No," he said, "but I've stopped nagging her. I've stopped thinking about leaving her. I think I've found the strength to go on living with her and loving her no matter what. I believe I have found the patience to lead her to the help she needs. And someday I think she will change." I think so, too. As some wise person said, prayer doesn't necessarily change things for you, but it changes you for things. 5. Learn to compromise. Compromise doesn't mean giving in. It just means that you recognize that there are two, or more, sides to every question. Sometimes it helps to trade a bit, in a good-humored way. If he will stop leaving the ice trays unfilled, she will stop squeezing the toothpaste tube in the middle. That sort of thing. When Ruth and I first bought a place in the country over 30 years ago, she loved the house, but I was bothered by the fact that across the road was a huge barn that cut off a part of our view. Ruth kept telling me how picturesque it was, but it still bothered me. It bothered me, in fact, for the next 21 years. Then another house became available 1/2 mile away where there was nothing to obstruct the view. By now Ruth was devoted to the house we had, but she knew how I felt about that barn. She felt that she had had her druthers for 21 years, now it was time for me to have mine. And so, gracefully, she agreed to move. Compromise. Lubricating oil in the machinery of marriage. 6. Practice the art of appreciation. Everybody cherishes a word of praise. Some psychologists believe that the desire for approval is one of the strongest human traits, maybe even the strongest. So why not master the art of the casual compliment, the little unforeseen gesture that says, "I think you're wonderful just the way you are." An unexpected bouquet of flowers. A love note in a pocket or under a pillow. It was Arnold Bennett, I believe, who remarked, in his bachelor days, that it seemed to him that marriage nearly always resulted in the death of politeness between man and wife. But that doesn't have to be the case. Try complimenting your wife or your husband just once a day. The resulting rush of affection will surprise you. If they don't die of astonishment first. 7. Strive always to increase the spiritual dimension of your life together. Marriage is a difficult and demanding relationship. People in it need all the help they can get. A simple and extremely practical rule is to keep Christ in the center of your life, and decisions will be sounder, joys will be greater, troubles will be more bearable, burdens will seem lighter. One businessman said a surprising and unexpected thing to me: when I'm away from home, I call my wife long distance every night. And when I do, I try to visualize God as a third person listening in, sharing our problems, understanding our needs, watching over both of us. It is a kind of prayer, I guess. Anyway, we both get a lot of good out of it. Of course they do. And so do married couples who pray together, go to church together, read the Bible together, believe together. There is a Bible passage that sums it up: except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Psalms 127 verse 1. I once heard a wise marriage counselor compare marriage to the base camp that mountain climbers establish when they plan the conquest of some mighty peak like the Matterhorn or Mount Everest. The mountain represents life itself. The base camp of marriage is the place where the climbers, the marriage partners, keep the supplies and equipment that are essential to their assault on the mountain. The base camp really represents survival. If at a temporary camp at higher elevations something goes wrong, the climbers can always retreat to the base camp to find food and warmth and shelter, to renew their strength for another attempt. There is liberty for each of the climbers to go forth and try different routes to the summit. But the base camp is where communication takes place, where plans and decisions are made. Unless the base camp functions as it is intended to function, the expedition will fail. So if you are married, or if you ever intend to be married, hold in your mind the image of a base camp well and truly chosen, equipped with love and companionship, warmed by loyalty and faith and trust. And never forget to ask God's blessings on all comings and goings. Then venture forth with confidence to climb the highest peaks that life can offer.